Hello, students. I hope all is well. I hope your afternoon is going well. As you know, we don't have any classes today because of the treacherous nature of the roads, and so we're going to be doing this on this recorded lecture today. Also, because we're not together, we can't do the lab. Our lab today is to dissect a crawdad, and believe me, I will save those for you. We will do them next week, okay? So next week we have a grasshopper, and we'll add the crawdad to it. It should be able to fit in just fine. I'll show you toward the end of this lecture. We'll start a little bit on next week's lecture so we don't have to do it next week, and therefore next week we can just concentrate on insects. All right, so here we are. We're looking at phylum Arthropoda, and we're going to see about the arthropods. The arthropods are one of the largest, I think they are the largest group of animals on the planet, and so we will see the diversity and stuff of those here. All right. That's a cool picture right there, this really great shrimp. Let's watch an introduction. There we go.
We're in the lab of the Smithsonian Insect Zoo, but that name is a little wrong because we have a lot more than insects here. Technically, we are an arthropod zoo. So what is an arthropod? It's actually pretty simple. It's a group of animals with specific characteristics. The main one being a jointed leg or foot, and that's where the name arthropod comes from. They also have a hard outer shell or exoskeleton, and they're bilaterally symmetrical, which means if you drew a imaginary line down the middle, they'd be virtually identical on both sides. Scientists have divided arthropods into 5 major groups. Those are the millipede, the centipede, the crustaceans, the arachnids, and of course the insects. So if we're looking at these 5 major groups of arthropods, how do we tell which is which? How do they fit into their groups? Well, they each have defining characteristics. Millipedes are a long, thin, slow-moving animal, and they're segmented, and they have 4 legs for each of those segments. A centipede is a long, thin, predatory animal. They're amazing hunters and very fast. And their main characteristics, they have 2 legs for each of their body segments. The crustaceans have 10 or more legs in pairs. They have 2 pairs of antennae, and they have 2 main body regions, the abdomen and the cephalothorax. Arachnids, the group which includes spiders and scorpions, have 8 legs in pairs, no antenna, and 1 or 2 body regions. If it's 2 body regions, they're called the cephalothorax and the abdomen. Insects, one of the most diverse group of arthropods, can be characterized through its 3 body parts, the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. They have a pair of antennae. Some have wings. But most importantly, they have 6 legs in pairs.
All right, so that's a really good introduction, gave us a lot of the information we need. Right now, though, we're going to be filling out in your books on your lab page there, you're going to see our blanks here to fill these in. So that's where these go. So these are the largest phylum of invertebrates out there, and like I said before, the largest group of animals on the earth because they include the insects, yeah. Here are their common characteristics, so you're going to write these down. Ready? All have an exoskeleton. All right, so that's that hard outer, skeleton. They do not have bones on the inside, okay? We'll get to more detail on that one in just a minute about molting. They have body segmentation. In general, this 3 body parts, although sometimes the head and thorax are fused together to make a cephalothorax, so it looks like only 2 body parts, but they are kind of separated, just that you can't tell very much. But they have body segmentation. That's what you're going to write down. They have jointed appendages. You see jointed foot over there in quotes. That is the meaning of the word arthropod. Okay, arthropod means jointed foot. So they have articulated appendages, legs and arms. They have a ventral nervous system. Okay, I'll show you what that means here in a minute. And number 5, they have what's known as an open circulatory system, which we will get to that as well. All right, so the video told you about the different classes. We have class Crustacea, class Diplopoda, which is the millipede, class Chilopoda, which is the centipede, class Arachnida is the spiders and such, and then class Insecta, which is the largest group, and those are the insects, of course. Today we're going to be looking at the Crustacea and the Arachnida. Next week we'll look at the millipedes, centipedes, and insects. Okay, so Arachnida is supposed to be on next week, but we'll go ahead and talk about them this week just to get them out of the way so I can have more time for dissection next week. Okay, they have this exoskeleton. Now it's tough outer covering like an armor that's around them. Okay, it is usually made of something called chitin. That's that word right there, C-H-I-T-I-N, chitin. It is hard yet flexible. If you've ever had to squish a bug and it goes crunch, it's going crunch because of that chitin in there, okay? Interestingly, chitin is the same chemical that you find in mushrooms. You know, the way they kind of snap a little bit, but they're not quite as hard. It's a little more soft chitin than the hard chitin. But the arthropods secrete this chitin and then it hardens on them and gives them that protection. Because it's heavy and on the outside of them, it will limit the size of arthropods. They don't get very large because they can't support that much weight against the gravity of the earth. As they grow, that exoskeleton does not grow with them. And so they have to go through this process known as molting, where they actually split out of their old exoskeleton, and then there's a new one underneath that's kind of very soft at the beginning, and it has to harden over time. I'll show you some pictures here in a minute. To molt is to shed the outer covering, and a new one will replace it. It's typically quite a bit larger so that they can grow into it. Okay, so that's their way of growing. And they leave those exoskeletons, those old molted exoskeletons, they leave them around, you know, and you've probably found some of them. For instance, right here, we're looking at the progress of a crab that's in the process of molting. Okay, so that top left picture, that's the first one there. The green part is actually the new part of the crab. Okay, so the reddish part is his old exoskeleton. Okay, so if you move to the right up here, you can see he's coming out of the old exoskeleton here, all right, and backing out of it, if you will. Then down here we see more, and this green part is new, and these legs right here are very, very new exoskeleton, very almost kind of soft at this point. And as he gets out of it, he leaves this old part behind, and here's the new part. He'll be a little vulnerable at the beginning while his new exoskeleton hardens. Okay, so I believe this is taking place under the water, and so he would harden with the being exposed to the cool and the salt of the water. Here's a spider that has crawled out of its old skin, the one here in the middle. That's his old skin. He's backed out of it, and here's his new skin. See, it's larger because he's grown, and then he leaves this part behind right there. This one's a little different. It's not as much molting as it is metamorphosizing, but this is a cicada backing out of its exoskeleton. He leaves this exoskeleton behind, and he's got his new bigger body here, but this new bigger body, you can see right here, has the wings on it. So this critter will have gone through a bit of metamorphosis into its last stage. So this would have been its pupal stage, or its larval pupal, and now its adult stage coming on here. But that is still a molting of that exoskeleton. You've seen those around hanging on to screen doors and stuff like that. All right, segmented body. So I told you it's essentially we have 3. So let's start over here with our insect. We have our head, our thorax, and our abdomen. Those are the 3 parts. But oftentimes the head and the thorax are fused together, like in the spider. They're fused together. So the spider appears to only have 2 of these segments in its body. And we have our scorpion, head, and thorax. Those are somewhat separated, but our crawdad, our crustacean, we're going to see today has it fused together. So we call that a cephalothorax. And notice in our millipede, it's a little bit different. It really only has the head, but look at all those different segments right there. So it's definitely still a segmented creature, just not quite as neatly classified as with the 3 body parts there. Okay, the jointed foot, just like our human body has joints at the hip and the knee, you can see we have joints right here. We call that an articulated skeleton. And in their case, of course, the skeleton is on the outside and ours is on the inside. But that allows for movement and some fairly, intricate movement at that, jumping and picking things up, stuff like that. Okay, we talked about one of the points being the ventral nervous system. So I want you to remember what ventral means. The best way to remember ventral is to remember what dorsal is. Okay, so dorsal is the top side, the back side, where this yellow area is right here. Think about a shark with its dorsal fin on there. All right, so the dorsal part is the back. The belly side then is the ventral system. So these creatures have their nervous system, here's the brain, the blue part, coming down here along their belly. Okay, so that's sort of a way, think about, to protect it, because they don't have, our nervous system is being protected by our bones, right? So our vertebrae protect our nervous cord. These guys don't have that. So really their armor of their exoskeleton is protecting it. And if they have it on the belly right there, that makes it way far down. So if something comes close to the top of them, they're being protected on the underneath here. Although we do talk about the soft underbelly of some of these things. They'll be very vulnerable if they roll over on their back and their belly is exposed. And part of the reason is because that's where their nervous system is. Also, you can see here, I think the green part here is the digestive system. We're going to get to their open circulatory system here in a minute. Oh, speaking of their nervous system, however, their eyes can be very complex and fascinating. For instance, here we're looking at an insect. Each one of those little circle areas right there is a different lens inside of the eye right here. So while they can't really turn their head and move their eyes to see something, they have such full vision because of all the different lenses they have going in all directions. So they can see all directions all the time. Where, of course, we can move our eyes, but we have to move them from one place to another. Spiders are a little different. They have 8 eyes, and they're arranged in different ways. And like I said, we'll be talking about spiders at the end of our lecture today. And hopefully next week we'll bring a spider for you to take a look at. I have some small ones, but I used to have a big one, and I'll see if I can find it. All right, here's our open circulatory system. So what that means is that when the blood is pumped through the body, it ends up kind of dumping it down into the abdominal area, right down in here. Where we have a closed circulatory system, our blood is always contained within vessels, blood vessels. It doesn't leak out. If it leaks out, that's called bleeding, right? So we have a closed system. In the arthropods, it's open. So the heart pumps the blood into the body, and then it just releases it down to smother or bathe all of the tissues in the oxygen-rich blood. And so that's how they get the oxygen to them. All right, and then of course they have some way of respiring, some way of breathing to get the oxygen put back into the blood. Usually it's through lungs. And so we'll see that today. We'll be looking at the crawdad, which of course is going to be using gills because it's a water creature. All right, so that's their open circulatory system. Now we're looking specifically at class Crustacea. Our examples are going to be our crayfish or crawdad, shrimp, lobster, crabs, and we're going to be keying in on this one because we'll be dissecting a crawdad. The external features include they balance with antennules or something. They have this cool thing called a statocyst. I'll show you a picture in just a second. They use their antenna to help with their taste sense, their sense of taste. They have these claws on the front called chilipeds or kilipeds. You can think if you want to call it a kiliped, that's how they kill their prey. They grab prey, provide defense. They can fight each other. They can fight other creatures as well with those giants. Sometimes they only have one of those, sometimes 2. They have their tail, known as the telson, and the uropod and the swimmerets for locomotion. They can move or swim based on those. So I want to bring back this idea of the statocyst. Their balance, the way they balance. They have these little features. Oh, I thought I had that picture there. The picture of the statocyst right here about balancing. It must be coming up later. All right, here's our body segmentation. We have our head, thorax, and abdomen. Notice that the head and the thorax are sort of fused together here. There is a line demarking them, but they're kind of one piece, okay? That's called the cephalothorax. And this whole thing that's covering them right there, we call that the carapace. the carapace. And it's just a fairly large piece of their exoskeleton covering their vital organs, So right here would be their brain, and then right under here would be their heart and their gills. All right, we see their kilopeds or chilopeds right up here. There's 2 in their case. We see the body segmentation here of the abdomen. All right, and the back part of the tail called the telson, which can curve back and forth like this in order to do some movement, quick movement, and including some swimming. They also walk on the bottom of the water, of the lake or whatever, pond, using their walking legs right here. Here are their large antenna and their small antennules. That's for sensory reception, and then, like I said, some balance as well. All right, here's a crab, and we can see this is an ocean crab, so this is one that would be obviously breathing with its gills. We can tell that because look at his legs. They're like paddles, right? They would use those for swimming, but they also can walk, and then they have their kilopeds up here as well, and their claws, if you will. In fact, if we're going to eat crab, probably the meat in these claws are the best part of them right there. Notice this is also called the carapace, right here, that cephalothorax region, and you can hardly see. I'll show you a picture in a bit about the underside of these guys where you can see the abdominal segmented part a little better. All right, so the crayfish has 6 sets of appendages. You're going to write these down. All right, the first one will be the walking legs. Here they're named parapods, right here for walking. Next we'll have the swimmerets. You can't see those in this picture. They're underneath on the ventral side of the abdominal area here. We have the uropod and telson, so that's the tail region. All right, remember they use that for movement and for like a fin, swimming through the water. We have the kilopeds or chilopeds right here for defense and for capturing prey. The antennules are the smaller ones right in here, the small off the head, and then the antennae, the longer ones right here. Okay, so we should see all of those on our little critter. Make sure and write those down. If I haven't given you enough time to write all those down, you can pause the video right now and spend that time writing. Here you can see the swimmerets and the underside of the uropod, and the telson right here. You see how they're segmented as well right here. But you can see the swimmerets are these little legs that actually do aid in actually swimming, like they are described. Okay, you can actually tell the difference between a male and female. So when you get your crawdad next week, we'll try to figure out if it's male or female. The male has these claspers right on here. Look like extra swimmerets really, but they're larger. And the female doesn't have them. Here's another picture that shows you a little bit. So when it comes to drawing, this time in your book, the drawings are already there for you, which is pretty nice that somebody already drew it for you, and you'll just have to label the parts. And so I think in the book, if you want to go look at it and start doing that labeling from this picture, you can do that, which will save you time when you're actually doing your dissection. At the end of this recording, you will see a dissection of a crawdad that will help you to get started. So next week, I won't have to give you very much instruction about that because you will have already watched the dissection take place. Okay, so you'll get right into it. Here are the mouth parts. This is drawn so we can see it in a version. When you look at it for real, they don't quite match up necessarily. See our antennae coming out here, and then our antennules right there. And then we'll see our maxilliped and the mandible right here. And the different maxillipeds. These are all to aid in feeding. And it's a little creepy, really. So you'll be delving into that when you do your dissection. Here's the actual picture of it. Okay, so the maxilliped and the mandible. You'll have to look really close when you get that next time. This right here at the top is part of the cephalothorax. At the very, very top is that pointed part. Some of them have more pointed rostrum than other, but that is the name of it. It's called the rostrum. You'll be labeling that. Notice you can see those kilopeds really nicely here in the antennules and the antennae in that picture. Your critter's going to look a whole lot like this guy right here. Sometimes their eyes are on bigger stalks than this. They come out a little farther. So we'll see next week if our guy has that. All right, when we take off the carapace during the dissection time, you're going to see beautiful, beautiful gills. They're very, very easy to see. very large. They spend obviously a lot of their time using their gills. They need those for breathing, right? Their open circulatory system, you'll see here, you won't necessarily, when you start dissecting, you won't necessarily see all of these things. But we know we have our ventral nerve cord, so we might be able to tell that one. It's going to be hard to tell for sure. We're going to see the heart, which we should be able to find. And remember, it's just going to end up dumping that blood into this area right here, into that open circulatory system. So we're going to be looking for that heart. That's why I have a star here. And the eye, behind the eye and underneath, there's this thing called a green gland. You'll see right here. All right, so we'll be using that green, well, trying to find the green gland. It's literally green, and it is part of the digestive system. Here's our stomach right here. Yeah. Okay, so we'll be looking for all those things. Oh, yes, and they have double membranes on all their appendages. So right down here, their legs right here have a double membrane. That means that if one of these should get torn off, like say they're in a fight or something, then they won't bleed out. You think about it, this is open blood in right here. So if I made a hole in their abdomen, that blood's just going to come rushing out. Well, fortunately, they have this double membrane, so they can actually have a leg torn off and survive it just fine, and oftentimes they'll grow that back. Okay, so you'll see especially a crawdad, which is fighting, might be missing one of his kilopeds because he was probably in a fight or something. All right, their nervous system, they have a brain. Let's go back right here. Do we see it in the picture? Encephalon, that would be it right there. And our ganglion. Okay, so the encephalon is supposed to, that's the brainish. Notice that the eye is next to it, which is a sensory organ. It's part of the nervous system. It's going to send that down to that ventral nerve cord right there. And we see ganglion are just going to be those bulges that are going to send information down. Okay, so 2 ganglia, each with a nerve cord, and the nerves joined together on the ventral side. The information is sent from the sensory receptors. Say the eye would get, light signals. We would also have taste coming in from the antennules, those kind of things. It gets interpreted by the brain. Antennules are going to be helping with balance as well. So that's part of the nervous system. This is where the statocysts, I thought earlier I was going to talk about it. Here's that word. They have these specialized organs called statocysts that sense very, very small changes in the orientation of the animal's head. So I'm going to show you a picture of it. Here's what happens. As they move their head around, this little ball, it's like a little rock, that will tumble across these little hairs right here. And it trips these little hairs. So therefore the brain knows exactly in relationship to gravity where the head is, which will keep the creature from falling over. We have something very similar to this, a little more complex, in our ears, our inner ears, which gives us balance in our inner ears. So pretty cool little feature right there. Their digestive system, let's see, they're scavengers. They eat about anything. They use their mandibles to break the food. So that would be that part of the mouth right there next to the little maxillae, right? They swallow the food down the esophagus into the stomach. And they have 2 regions in their stomach. One grinds the food into smaller particles, and the other one sends small particles to digestive glands, and they secrete enzymes for help with digestion. The larger particles are sent to the intestine, and they're broken down more slowly there. Okay, so fairly complex. Here you can see they have the 2 parts of the stomach. The cardiac stomach is the one very close to the heart region right here. Here's some digestive glands. And I believe there's another stomach right there. We'll see that in the dissection. This is really similar to what our dissection will end up looking like. This is a preserved critter right here. All right, I told you that you would see more of that segmentation on the underneath of these crabs. You see those segments right there? Okay, so we have the cephalothorax is kind of on top with the abdomen sort of on the underneath portion. You can tell by looking at the underside. This would be the female, a much larger area here, and then the male right here. So you can tell just by looking at them if you had a whole crab that you're looking at. I have some little crabs. So this is a special kind of a crab called a fiddler crab, and this is a really great little video showing how they use. Notice they have one, they're called fiddler crabs because only one of their kilopeds is large and the other one is smaller, and it looks like they're holding a fiddle, and then they actually do a little dance. So this is a critter that somebody's got in their fish tank, and he's going to put on a little show because there's a female down here somewhere. We'll see her. So he's doing his dance. He's trying to impress the female. There she is. You see her coming up? She sees him. And this, of course, is a mating ritual here. He's trying to impress her. All right, you get the idea there. Notice he's got the big claws. She does not. So this is a feature of the males. And yeah, and so that's part of the mating ritual. Okay, so at this point, you should have filled out everything on 12A. I want you to go ahead and turn over to 12B. And we're going to be looking at the spiders real quick, okay? So we'll just start this now so that we don't have to worry about it next week. All right, so this is class Arachnida, the arachnids, which include scorpions, spiders, and ticks, among other things. There are different kinds of ticks and that kind of thing. But we're going to see what they have in common here. So the common characteristics are these. They have 4 pair of walking legs, so 8 legs. They have a cephalothorax, so it's fused together right here. They still have their abdomen as well. They have 4 pair of simple eyes. Remember I told you they had the spiders had the 8 eyes. We'll look at those. I think we'll look at that a little more. I showed you earlier in this presentation. No antennae, okay, at all. So that's one of the big characteristics right there. You might think that these are antennae, but they're not. That's part of the mouthpieces of the spider. They have a special kind of respiration called book lungs. They're called that because they look like pages in a book, okay? So they're like little leaves of pages in a book. And we'll see kind of a picture of them. You know, spiders are typically quite small, so seeing their features are a little bit more difficult than some of the bigger things. Many of them have something called a spinneret, and they produce silk, which makes a web. Not all of them do that, but lots of them do, and we'll see some examples of that. Okay, spiders that do not spin webs, they actually stalk their prey. Okay, so they will search them out, look for them, and then pounce on them. All right, so here's one. Y'all should recognize this. This is a tarantula, and so they don't spin a web at all. They just wait for their prey to come by, and then they will pounce. And then they have usually these massive, like, fangs that bite into their prey. Kind of creepy. Here we see it close up. You can see those eyes. So we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's one back here, 7 and 8 right back there. Here's that mouth portion right there that has those big fangs, and then their legs right here that they will use to capture their prey. So our web spiders, they're all over the place. We have plenty around here. Most of them will spin a web in order to trap their prey. They also use it for their living conditions. They help make their homes more soft, if you will. Spider silk, it turns out, is very strong. It's flexible. You wouldn't think of it as being as strong as it is, but it is almost as strong as like silk. In fact, they call it spider silk because of its strength that way. There's several web types. There's orb, which is the most common that you will recognize, the ones we see, you know, like for Halloween, right? Then we have the sheet web, all right, and you see those on the ground. I'll show you a picture in a minute. The tangle, which looks like they haven't spent a whole lot of time designing it. And then one of my favorites, of course, would be the trapdoor spider. But they are engineering marvels. This is our orb right here, so the one that you think about like as a Halloween one, right? So we have a very intricate engineering feat taking place here. So our spider starts here, and she starts to spin. We'll watch a little video in here how they spin their web. And it's part of it's not sticky, part of it is sticky. That's to catch their prey. They you know, latch onto different parts, and they will make their web. And you've probably noticed that they'll make it pretty quickly. Like one day it won't be there, the next day it'll be this massive spider web. Here's what one looks like. We'll see in our video how the water droplets on there are important. They help with part of its engineering aspects. This is our sheet. Okay, so the sheet web will be along the ground. So that spider is terrestrial. It's living on the ground. And look what it's capturing. Not only will it capture prey, but it also captures water there. Okay, and they're able to actually use that water for drinking. Here is our tangle. It looks like they haven't made much sense of it, but because it's tangled, you can see how things will get stuck in it. It looks like that they've incorporated this leaf right here into it. Okay, pretty cool. All right, we're going to watch the video about this, and then we'll look at our trapdoor. This is a pretty cool video.
But if you think the bridge is a masterpiece of structural engineering, then up here you'll find an engineering miracle. The spider's web, one of nature's oldest and most successful designs. Unchanged in over 100 million years, as a trap, it still works a treat. So what's the secret of the web's design? First, the spider spins the spokes and outline, giving her web strength. Then she turns back on herself, using a particularly sticky silk to weave a lethal trap for any passing insects. It's like watching a master architect at work. With her work done, she leaves a free zone at the hub and waits. But where does all that silk come from? Here in Oxford, there's a group of scientists willing to go to extreme lengths to find out. Once they've caught one, they then have to milk it. Without hurting it, the scientists can pull up to 700 meters of silk from the spider in one continuous strand. But to discover why the silk is so strong, we need to have a closer look at the spider itself. At 12,000 times magnification, a whole new world is revealed. Here on the spider's abdomen are 4 organs known as spinnerets. Each of them is dotted with lots of mobile, finger-like protrusions called spigots, which make liquid silk just a few thousandths of a millimeter thick. The spider pulls threads of it from the spigots, turning the liquid silk into a solid, and twisting several strands together to give the thread strength. Each spider can produce several different types of silk from their spinnerets. From sticky sheets used to wrap the victim, to an incredibly strong single thread. A strength which is completely disproportionate to its scale. Each fine strand is just 1/30th the thickness of a human hair, but if it was as thick as a pencil, it could tow an ocean liner with ease. But the genius of the web lies not just in its super strong thread, but in how that thread is used. And that secret lies in the water droplets at every junction. Inside each droplet, strands of web are tightly curled. Scientists believe that when a fly slams into it, these strands unravel, allowing the web to flex and stretch. Without breaking. industry has already learned from some of the spider's tricks. We may not be able to spin it from our abdomens, but when it comes to producing strong threads, we're catching up with the spiders all the time.
All right, there we go. Pretty fascinating stuff. Furthermore, I think it just really speaks to the fact that this was designed, right? That it makes different kinds of silk for different kinds of purposes. That is fascinating to me. All right, here's that trapdoor spider. This guy's really cool. So his web's a little different. It's more like a cardboard or something that he's made. So he's hollowed out himself a little groove right here. And then this is the door. Somebody has taken this and opened it. All right, but our next picture is going to show, this is a gif of how it's going to be opening up to get that critter, that poor unsuspecting critter. And gotcha, right there. And then the trapdoor closes. Yeah, pretty cool. And this next one, we're going to see a trapdoor that's been opened by someone, and the spider's going to come back and close it. Thank you very much. They like to have their trapdoor closed, but that's a pretty cool deal right there. Our spider anatomy, okay, so we can see that we have our cephalothorax and the abdomen, which is where the spinnerets are, and all the legs right there, and then the mouth parts, and then the eyes as well. Inside, if we did have a big enough spider, you would see all of this stuff going on. Look at that big heart right there. And it brings us down to here. See these right here? These are called our book lungs. They look like little pages in a book. We should see our, look, it says poison gland. This would be with a fang right here. You know, some of them, of course, are poisonous to us. Some of them are not poisonous to us. But they do bite with their fang right there. Here's our brain and our ventral nervous system. I guess it's coming out right over here. Okay, and then the digestive system, stomach, intestine right here. Okay, but like I said, spiders are pretty small. It's hard to see all that. But here's what the book lungs look like, kind of. They're these little different pages, if you will. And if we look at those from the other side, you would see how they have these like feathery, projections, and that allows it to pick up the oxygen with all that surface area right there. The oxygen comes in and picks it up and takes it to the bloodstream. Pretty cool. All right, now this is going to be the dissection. I don't think it's quite as long as it looks right there, but pay attention so you know next time what to do. I will say when she starts to cut away at the carapace, typically I found that we could actually peel it off without cutting, but we'll watch her technique and see how she does it.
As we examine the external anatomy, we notice that the body of the crayfish is divided into two regions, the cephalothorax and the abdomen. The abdomen is divided into 6 segments that end with 3 fins, which make up the tail fan. The crayfish's body is covered with a hard exoskeleton made of chitin and calcium carbonate. The exoskeleton of the crayfish we are dissecting has a reddish-brown color, but crayfish may be black, brown, blue, white, or other colors. The part of the exoskeleton covering the cephalothorax is the carapace. The carapace covers the back and sides of the cephalothorax, but it does not fit tightly against the body. There is a space between the body and the carapace so water can circulate through the gills. The exoskeleton has a movable joint between the cephalothorax and the abdomen to allow the crayfish to move its tail. Although the head and thorax are fused into a single segment, which is the cephalothorax, there is a visible boundary between the head and the thorax. This boundary is called the cervical groove. The triangular-shaped part of the carapace between the eyes is the rostrum. The crayfish has 2 compound eyes, which extend above the body on eye stalks. Like all arthropods, a crayfish has jointed appendages. At the anterior end are 2 or 3 pairs of jointed appendages called antennae. Antennae are sensory organs for the crayfish's senses of touch and smell. 1 pair of antennae is long, But crayfish also have one or more pairs of shorter antennae called antennules. This particular species has 2 pairs of antennules. The other appendages are best seen if we flip the crayfish onto its dorsal side. The longest appendages are the 2 long chelipeds. Each cheliped is equipped with a large claw for capturing prey. After the crayfish catches its prey, the chelipeds pass food to 3 pairs of shorter appendages called maxillipeds, which pass the food to the mouth. To see the maxillipeds in action, let's look at a live crayfish similar to one in our lab. A pair of mandibles line the mouth, one mandible on the left and one on the right. The mandibles are hard, tooth-like appendages that work back and forth to cut the crayfish's food into small pieces. Next to the mandibles are 2 pairs of tiny mouthparts called maxillae. Maxillae wave back and forth to push water into the space between the carapace and the body to circulate water over the gills. The crayfish has 4 pairs of walking legs located along the side of the cephalothorax. Along the ventral side of the abdomen are several pairs of jointed appendages called swimmerets. Swimmerets aid in swimming and in reproduction. Now that we've examined the external anatomy of the crayfish, let's turn our attention to the internal anatomy. To see the internal organs of the crayfish, we need to remove a portion of the carapace. We need to use pins to hold the specimen in place while we make the incisions. After the crayfish is secure, we insert the point of the scissors into the joint between the cephalothorax and the abdomen, and then make an incision along the side of the cephalothorax up into the rostrum. Next, we make a transverse incision across the rostrum just behind the eyes. Then, we make another incision back down the opposite side of the carapace to the posterior end of the carapace. Some of the crayfish's internal organs may be stuck to the carapace, so we need to gently scrape them loose while lifting up the incised portion of the carapace. From the medial incision we made earlier, we cut along the cervical groove to the bottom of the carapace. Then, we carefully remove the carapace and repeat the procedure on the opposite side. Next, we need to remove the exoskeleton covering the dorsal side of the abdomen. We make an incision along the top of the abdomen to the tail fan. We carefully lift off each segment of the exoskeleton covering the abdomen. Now we can see some of the organs of the digestive system. The crayfish has 2 stomachs, the cardiac stomach and the pyloric stomach. This line extending the length of the abdomen is the intestine, which ends at the anus. The crayfish has an open circulatory system, which pumps hemolymph instead of blood. Its heart is located above the pyloric stomach. We can also see the dorsal artery, which carries hemolymph away from the heart. The crayfish uses gills to extract oxygen from water. At the base of the crayfish's 2 large antennae are the green glands. The green glands are part of the crayfish's excretory system. They filter liquid waste from the crayfish's hemolymph. The nervous system is quite simple, consisting of groups of ganglia and a ventral nerve cord. Crustaceans are a diverse group of invertebrates. However, by examining the anatomy of the crayfish, we can get a good representation of the anatomy of all crustaceans. In our next lab,
All right, so I'll expect y'all to have watched that, and therefore next time when you come, you'll be able to do that. Like I said, though, getting the carapace off, I think we can actually peel it off, okay? And that'll be an easier way to do that. All right, so that brings us to the end of our lecture today. So hopefully you've got all your blanks filled in. If you have any questions, you can email those questions to me or write them down, and when we get together next week, you can ask me those questions. All right, everybody, Have a great week, and I'll see you next week. Keep nice and warm.